In the world of country music, there is no one more iconic than Garth Brooks. With over 170 million records sold, he is the second largest selling music artist of all time, just behind the Beatles. On October 3rd of 2024, a graphic lawsuit brought by his wife's former stylist accused Brooks of sexual battery. Then, just hours later, a prior lawsuit filed under a pseudonym Brooks used surfaced when the music star made accusations of his own. Welcome to Exposed, Scandalous Files of the Elite. The thunder has rolled. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Exposed, Scandalous Files of the Elite. I'm your host, Jim Chapman. And just quickly, before we get into today's episode, remember to rate us on whatever platform you listen to. I can't tell you how much it helps. It pushes us up that feed. And I'm going to jump into today's episode. Now, there are some cases that I never want to do, and this would qualify. Why? Because like probably everybody else out there, or anybody who is a fan of country music, certainly Garth Brooks is pretty much the pinnacle and has had, I think, 170 million plus album sales, which is phenomenal, puts him second all time in the United States behind the Beatles. So it gives me no pleasure to tell you what I'm about to tell you. And I'm going to preface this with, it's important to keep in mind, in this case, this is not adjudicated. These are accusations. Three sides to every story. One person's side, the other person's side, and the truth in the middle. So I'm just going to give you the straight facts on this. And before we get into it, I'm going to tell you, this is one of the more graphic lawsuits that I've read. So if you're listening to this and you got kids in the car or something like that, look, don't ever listen to my podcast with kids in the car. That would be my recommendation. But if you're listening to this around sensitive ears, throw some headphones on and we'll get into it. A lawsuit was filed. This was on September 13th of 2024, and it raised a lot of eyebrows. It was filed in the Southern District of Mississippi, and it was filed under a John Doe, and it was versus a Jane Roe. And it says the plaintiff files this memorandum in support of his motion to file his complaint under a pseudonym, to proceed in this action under a pseudonym, and to file under seal. And then it gets into the introduction. And it says, the defendant has threatened to publicly file a lawsuit against plaintiff, the John Doe here, alleging false claims of sexual misconduct that allegedly occurred years ago unless plaintiff pays her millions of dollars. Plaintiff, a celebrity and public figure, is therefore forced to file this lawsuit to prevent the irreparable harm that such a public filed lawsuit would have on his reputation, family, career, and livelihood. However, filing under his name in the public docket would cause the same irreparable harm to plaintiff's reputation and goodwill that he seeks to avoid through this lawsuit. And let me stop right there for a second and explain to you what's going on here. There are laws called the public's right to know. And when a lawsuit is filed, technically, the rules are you have to file it publicly. You have to put your name. And the reason for that is they don't want a bunch of people filing frivolous lawsuits under pseudonyms, and there's really no damage to their reputation because nobody knows who they are if it's just a bunch of made up bullshit. And so the law is Unless there's extenuating circumstances, you have to file under your actual name, and the public has a right to know that. That's the law. Now, when it comes to sexual allegations, it's different because they protect those people in many cases, as they should. If you've been raped, you don't want your name out there that you've been raped, in a lot of cases, not all. So in this case, when what was discovered to be Garth Brooks, I'll go ahead and tell you that, filed this, he's given his reasonings for him not to be publicly disclosed and to have this lawsuit sealed. So I'll move on from there. The only way to prevent the irreparable harm is to allow plaintiff to file his complaint under seal and proceed under that pseudonym, and to file any personally identifying exhibits under seal with redactions sufficient to protect the parties' identities. Then it gets into the facts of the case from the plaintiff's perspective. Now, this is from Garth Brooks' perspective, and it's important to keep in mind the other lawsuit had not been filed yet. He kind of beat that lawsuit to the punch because this person was threatening to file a lawsuit at this time. So it goes on. It says the plaintiff is a well-known celebrity and public figure who resides in Tennessee. The defendant worked professionally with the plaintiff as an independent contractor for approximately 15 years before she relocated from Tennessee to Mississippi in May of 2020. Soon after moving to Mississippi, the defendant began demanding financial assistance from the plaintiff. The plaintiff acquiesced for some time, but when defendant demanded salaried employment and medical benefits, plaintiff could no longer agree. When the plaintiff refused to provide additional financial assistance to the defendant, she responded with false and outrageous allegations of sexual misconduct against the plaintiff she claims occurred years ago. On July 17th of 2024, an attorney acting at the defendant's direction sent the plaintiff and others who work with the plaintiff a demand letter alleging a litany of sexual misconduct by the plaintiff over the years, ranging from allegations of sexual grooming, creation of a sexually hostile work environment, unwanted sexual touching, and sexual assault. The defendant also alleged a belief that the plaintiff planned to hire someone to murder her. Defendant's July 17th letter was the first time the plaintiff learned of these allegations, none of which has any basis of fact. The defendant's July 17th letter threatened to publicly draft a civil lawsuit against the plaintiff and closed with a letter repeating the same fabricated allegations from the demand letter unless the plaintiff agreed to pay the defendant millions of dollars to not file suit. The letter referred to various celebrity sexual misconduct lawsuits featuring multi-million-dollar jury awards. In a follow-up letter dated August 23rd of 2024, the defendant, through her attorney, offered to refrain from publicly filing her false and defamatory lawsuit against the plaintiff in exchange for a multi-million-dollar payment. She threatened that if the plaintiff failed to meet this demand, he would face exposure of many millions of dollars based on his net worth. Defendant's allegations of sexual misconduct against the plaintiff are wholly untrue. Nevertheless, the public filing of these untrue allegations will substantially and irreparably damage the plaintiff's good reputation, his business, his relationships with family and friends. Even though the plaintiff is confident the court will find the defendant's false allegations to be meritless, the public disclosure of his name, defendant's name, and defendant's scandalous allegations alone will result in the irreparable loss of the plaintiff's goodwill and reputational harm in his industry. No amount of money or damages could adequately reimburse a plaintiff for the loss of goodwill and reputational harm. So that comes out, and, people are talking that were privy to that lawsuit publicly. It was just filed under a pseudonym. So nobody at that time knew it was Garth Brooks, but it was out there that a lawsuit from somebody famous had surfaced, a John Doe that was from Tennessee, and there was a lot of talk out there and chatter on who that might be. And then October 3rd, a Thursday evening, about 10 o'clock at night, I get a text from my wife who was in the other room, and she had texted me a link, and it said, Garth Brooks accused of rape in lawsuit from hair and makeup artist. And I'm like, what? And of course, with what I do for a living, I was all over it. And by Friday morning, I had the lawsuit in my hands, and I'm going to read it to you. And again, I'm going to say this is descriptive. So get ready. And it says Jane Roe versus Garth Brooks. Plaintiff Jane Roe hereby submits her complaint against defendant Garth Brooks and alleges as follows. And it lists what's known as a preliminary statement. In 1999, the plaintiff was hired to do the makeup and hairstyling for the Grammy Award-winning artist Trisha Yearwood. Miss Roe, because she filed under Jane Roe, a pseudonym, continued to work for Miss Yearwood over the years, as well as many other celebrities. And in 2017, she started to do makeup and hairstyling for Garth Brooks, Miss Yearwood's husband. By 2019, after Brooks learned that Miss Roe was experiencing financial difficulties, he hired Miss Roe more often. She was grateful for the additional income and thanked him repeatedly. It did not take long for Brooks to take advantage of her financial hardship. Brooks seized what he saw as an opportunity to subject a female employee to a side of Brooks that he conceals from the public. This side of Brooks believes he is entitled to sexual gratification when he wants it and uses a female employee to get it. It's fair game. One day in 2019, when Miss Roe was at Brooks' house to style his hair and do his makeup, she looked up in horror as Brooks walked out of the shower naked with an erection and pointing his penis at Miss Roe, coming directly towards her. He grabbed her hands and forced them onto his erect penis. Brooks appallingly told Miss Roe that he had fantasized about this moment and he wanted her to perform oral sex on him so that he could, quote, come all over her face, specifically while she had her glasses on, unquote. Shocked and confused, Miss Roe pulled back and said she was not going to do what he wanted. Knowing that she needed the work, however, Brooks correctly predicted that Miss Roe did not leave. Then in May of 2019, Brooks asked her to travel to Los Angeles with him for a Grammy tribute to Sam Moore. Usually there were others on Brooks' private jet, but this time Miss Roe and Brooks were the only two passengers. Once in Los Angeles at the hotel, Miss Roe could not believe that Brooks had booked a hotel suite with one bedroom, and she did not have a separate room. After they arrived, suddenly, Brooks appeared in the doorway to the bedroom, completely naked. He stood there and flexed his muscles. Miss Roe immediately had a sick feeling in her stomach, knowing she was trapped in the room alone with Brooks, with no one to help her, and far away from Nashville. Tragically, her worst fears came true when seconds later he was towering over her, his 6 foot, almost 300 pound frame ready to pounce on Miss Roe, who is less than 5 feet and 100 pounds. As she began to panic, he grabbed her hands and pulled her into the next room onto the bed where she could not escape his physical domination. Brooks' rape of Miss Roe was painful and traumatic, having no regard for her well-being and intent on his own sexual gratification at the expense of Miss Roe's physical, mental, and emotional trauma. At some point during the nightmare, Brooks even held her small body upside down by her feet and penetrated her. She was helpless to move from his grip and terrified at what was happening to her. While he held her upside down, dangling by her ankles, all the blood rushed to her head, causing her to be dizzy and sick. While Brooks forcefully penetrated her, he said perverted things to Miss Roe about his sexual prowess. Brooks also repeatedly slammed his penis into her vagina, causing Miss Roe's back to keep hitting his body over and over with such force she felt as if he were breaking her in two. Disgustingly, Brooks insisted that Miss Roe wear her glasses while he carried out his sexual assault fantasy. With cold disregard for Miss Roe, when Brooks was finished, it was business as usual. Miss Rowe worked quickly to style his hair and do his makeup for the event, so he was on time. Brooks subjected Miss Rowe to other appalling sexual conduct, all of which took place while Rowe was working for him. This includes, but is not limited to, the following. Brooks openly talked about sexual subjects in front of Miss Rowe, including, for example, cunnilingus. Brooks often changed his clothes in front of Miss Rowe and often purposely exposed his genitals and buttocks to Miss Rowe, knowing she would respond with a look of horror and disgust. Brooks repeated the sexual fantasy when he came out of the shower with an erection and forced her hands on his penis and forced her to listen to other sexual fantasies he had about her performing sexual acts on him. Brooks sent Miss Rowe sexually explicit text messages and pressured her to exchange in sexting with him. After the sexual assault in Los Angeles, Brooks increased the frequency of saying his sexual fantasies about her out loud, along with his physical gropings of her breast while she was doing his hair and makeup. Other sexually explicit remarks by Brooks, including him telling Miss Rowe that he had, quote, fucked multiple women in every corner of a hotel room, white, black, brown, whatever, and had done so on every surface in a hotel room, unquote. Brooks increased the frequency of his sexually charged conversations, including his repeated remarks of having a threesome with his wife, Miss Yearwood, in which he suggested Miss Rowe would be the third person, which Miss Rowe believes Brooks' wife overheard on at least one occasion. On too many occasions to list, Brooks would lavishly stare at Miss Rowe's breast and pressure Miss Rowe to open her shirt and allow him to physically touch her breast for purposes of arousal, after which Brooks would then masturbate. And regarding this, Brooks, who said he would take care of himself, also told Miss Rowe he could not let her see because, quote, when I come, it's gallons, unquote. In late October 2019, Brooks brought Miss Rowe to Los Angeles for 5 days, during which he physically groped her body, including her breast. Miss Rowe was terrified to be in a hotel room again, worried he would force himself on her. Her fears were justified as one morning when Miss Rowe went to Brooks' room to do his hair and makeup, he was on the bed, face down, wearing loose shorts, holding his crotch, and made it clear that he wanted to do what he had done before in Los Angeles with Miss Rowe prior. Miss Rowe managed to escape the situation because he was running late and people were waiting to pick him up. At times, Brooks implied the groping of her breasts would continue despite Miss Rowe insisting this was unwanted. For example, one time when he said while groping her, "Next time we mess around," and Miss Rowe clearly said no, he became visibly angry at Miss Rowe and left. The frequency was such that it was inevitable that other employees of Brooks likely saw or heard instances of unwanted physical groping of her breast while she was styling his hair and doing his makeup. In or about May of 2020, Brooks, while speaking to his manager with his wife also present, directly in front of Miss Rowe, talked about inventing a shampoo bottle that would double as a dildo. When Miss Rowe became uncomfortable and would not join in the conversation, Brooks became upset, slammed his fist down on the kitchen counter in frustration so hard that items on the counter moved, and he leaned in and spoke in a threatening manner to Miss Rowe. Following this incident, Miss Rowe sent a text to Brooks, and it quotes the text. "I have thought a lot about the conversation of last Monday. I can't work in an environment where explicit sexual comments are made about shampoo bottles doubling as dildos. I mean you no harm, and if you truly value my work, I'm happy to show up tomorrow and or wherever you may need my services." During a phone conversation in 2020, after she told Brooks that she was upset, he told his wife that Miss Rowe had seen his penis. Brooks tried to minimize what happened. So apparently at some point, y'all, he told his wife about it, according to her. But he tried to minimize that, and he said, "Oh, sweetheart, for one, I think I know Trisha pretty well, and she wasn't uncomfortable. And I said, you saw my stuff." That was it. We were talking about something and it just came up. Look, I'm worried you are overthinking this. After the sexual assault in Los Angeles, Brooks told Miss Rowe about a mysterious text message that he received in which a person claimed that Brooks had ruined his life. In a phone conversation about this text, Brooks said he had no idea who texted him the message and suggested that he thought it may be Miss Rowe's husband who had sent the text and tried to get her to reveal her husband's phone number. And wow, we just found out she was married during all this. Interesting. Brooks told Miss Rowe, I never want to hurt anybody. So that one, and he's referring to the mysterious text, it bothered me. It bothered me. I didn't know the number. Still referring to the supposed text message, Brooks also said, and that killed me. It broke my heart. It's like, God, I never want to hurt anybody. So I was scared to death. Brooks then started to talk about the fact that Miss Rowe had not worked for Brooks for several months. So he had one of his employees call her to see what's happening. And then, when they called you for work and you couldn't do it for 2 months, I thought, oh, crap. That's what I thought. Oh, crap. So I was trying to seek you out to come talk or whatever I needed to do. I don't want to hurt anybody, and I just felt bad. So at this point, he is trying to make sure that, smooth things over. He didn't want a lawsuit like what happened filed against him. This is all alleged by her. So according to her, she's texting him and they're talking back and forth on the phone, and he's insinuating her husband knows about the shit that had went on, and he was, freaking out about that. Then she didn't show up for work for 2 months, and he's getting nervous, according to her. Of course, Brooks knew that the sexual assault and rape that he had subjected Miss Rowe to in Los Angeles was bad, and further, she had told him about the severe back and neck pain she was experiencing. Concerned by the repercussions if she denied him the ability to sexually force himself on her again, Miss Rowe said on a call to Brooks in 2020, and I'm going to quote her, I want to make sure that even though I've told you no, that you're cool with no. I mean, no as in no fooling around like we had done. You are cool with that, right? Unquote. She was fearful that despite what he said, that Brooks was angry and upset with her. Miss Rowe said, when I saw you with another music artist, you were pretty upset with me. Incredibly, Brooks replied as follows, and it's going to quote the reply here. No, I would never be upset with you. Look at it this way, okay? Look at it. The best way I can explain it is me and you broke into a jewelry store, and the second we broke the door, we looked at each other and said, this isn't right. But we had already broken the door. And so I think me and you get out and run and just hope that nobody ever finds out and just love one another and be friends. Is that fair? Then in 2020, Brooks told her, I work with the best and I don't want to do something stupid that breaks this team up. So I will do whatever I need to do or whatever I don't need to do. But I just want to keep working with you. But if you feel weird working with me, it's fine. We don't have to work together. In response, Miss Rowe said, I've never found myself in a situation like this. I just don't know that I'm going to be able to look up. And I'm frankly a little frightened of you. I really am. And Brooks said, sweet baby, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine. That makes me frightened of you. In this phone conversation, Miss Rowe explains that it would be very difficult to work with Brooks again, to which Brooks said, I'm asking you to work together forever, and you have a place here as long as you want it. I'm lucky to have you. I don't want this to go anywhere, and I don't want something that happened in the moment to screw the whole 20 years I've known you. In addition to phone calls, there were multiple texts between Brooks and Miss Rowe, but while Miss Rowe was at the studio with Brooks to style his hair in 2020, Brooks surreptitiously took her phone and deleted most of the text messages he had sent to her containing explicit sexual content. Eventually, Miss Rowe was unable to continue working for Brooks, and she sought legal counsel about what happened. In addition, in or about May of 2021, Miss Rowe moved to Mississippi. When Miss Rowe's counsel contacted Brooks and disclosed the facts that Miss Rowe was preparing to file a complaint in California to hold him accountable for sexual assaults, and even shared a copy of the drafted complaint with Brooks, he used the fact that Miss Rowe had dared to speak with him about the harm he had forced on her as an opportunity to inflict even more harm and pain on Miss Rowe. Specifically, while pretending to be in discussions with Miss Rowe to resolve her legal claims against him, on September 13th, 2024, Brooks filed a preemptive abuse complaint. And that was the declaratory judgment I read to you at the beginning of this podcast. And it goes on, incredibly, the abusive Mississippi action, Brooks labeled himself the victim and claimed Miss Rowe was lying and was an extortionist who intended on destroying his professional reputation. Brooks alleged she threatened to file her complaint only because Brooks refused to give her a raise and pay for health insurance. The abusive action by Brooks is a blatant attempt to further control and bully his sexual assault victim by utilizing his multimillionaire resources to game the legal system. As part of the lawsuit he filed against Miss Rowe in desperation, Brooks simultaneously filed a motion to proceed under a pseudonym, John Doe. The basis for this, as described by Brooks, was because he has a well-earned reputation and decent and caring man, and therefore the sexual assault allegations are disclosed. He said it would create unavoidable damage to his family. Brooks is desperate to prevent his millions of fans from learning about the horrific things he has said and done to a junior female employee who did nothing to deserve such treatment. But our legal system is not a place to allow wealthy wrongdoers the ability to run workarounds on sexual assault victims who attempt to hold perpetrators accountable. Yet this is precisely what Brooks is trying to do. And it gives a little bit about both of their background. I'm going to spare you Garth Brooks because everybody knows his background, but just quickly on Miss Rowe, she's a professional makeup artist and hairstylist who has worked in the music industry for more than 30 years. Her work garnered a loyal list of clients, many of whom are household names. Through her hard work, Miss Rowe has performed the hairstyling and makeup for celebrities appearing in countless publications. Throughout her career, she's collaborated with many professional photographers, and unfortunately, in late 2018, the pressure on Miss Rowe to provide financial support for her family increased, and she needed to take on as much work as she can handle. And Miss Rowe shared her financial challenges with Brooks and his wife. And then it tells about a specific incident, and it says as part of her work with Brooks, Miss Rowe traveled to stadiums for concerts, such as to Notre Dame for part of his tour in 2018, and studios for filming commercials. She often performed work for him at a home he shared with his wife. Brooks intentionally fondled, grabbed, and kissed his wife in close physical proximity to Miss Rowe in a way that made Miss Rowe feel extremely uncomfortable. In addition, Brooks would tell Miss Rowe that he thought it was hot to see his wife be with another woman sexually, and implied she could be the other woman. Although it was disturbing, she did not respond to these suggestions. Miss Rowe has worked for Miss Yearwood since 1999 and worried that Miss Yearwood would hear things he was saying to Miss Rowe and be upset with her, even though, of course, such behavior was initiated by Brooks. For example, Brooks openly talked about sexual subjects in front of Miss Rowe, including blowjobs. Brooks regularly changed his clothes in front of Miss Rowe and often purposely exposed his genitals. In 2019, when she was at Brooks' home to do his hair and makeup, she set up her supplies in his bathroom as usual, but while she was setting up, Brooks starts taking a shower in front of her. He then comes out naked with an erection pointed directly at Miss Rowe. In shock, before she knew what to do, he grabbed her hands and forced them onto his erect penis. Disgustingly, Brooks said he wanted her to go down on him, and he said he had fantasies of her going down on him with her glasses on and ejaculating all over her face, which I told you about. After this event, he continued to repeat this sexual fantasy to Miss Rowe, as well as other fantasies he had about her. It also says in the lawsuit that Brooks uses more than one cell phone and sometimes would use different names and email addresses to communicate with Miss Rowe. He would tell Miss Rowe ahead of time that it would be him sending her communications under a different name. For example, in 2019, he texted her to use a certain email address with a woman's name. It will come back to you as, and he lists a woman's first and last name, but that is actually me. And he put a little smiley face emoji. Although Brooks thought he deleted everything on Miss Rowe's phone, he actually did not. And some texts remain, including those in which he encouraged Miss Rowe to speak in a sexualized manner to him, such as this message referring to his, quote, huge stick. And it shows a screenshot of that text. But here's where something is weird. She's talking to him and she says, in that huge stick you carry. And he writes, I'll take that nickname. Thank you. I love you. So she brought up the huge stick. So it proves that something was going on with that text, but it's her saying that to him. So put that in your back pocket for a second. And then it just goes on to list the causes of action, which are the laws that he broke, right? Sexual battery, sexual misconduct, things of that nature. Now, let me say this before I get to Brooks' statement, because he has responded to this and issued a statement. But before I get to that, there's a few things that bother me about this lawsuit. Number one, she has very little of the text communications that they did back and forth. And I know that her story here, what she alleges is that he grabbed her phone and deleted a bunch of their text messages that were suggestive. But you're texting Garth Brooks. By the time he had grabbed that phone and started deleting messages, it was well into her relationship with him where he was allegedly forcing her to do a lot of things. I would imagine there's not very many people listening to this podcast right now that are thinking, I would have not saved a copy of that somewhere or screenshotted that and printed it out or uploaded it to a cloud. I mean, in 2020, 2019, everything cloud-based stuff was very common. I just can't imagine that you're texting the largest country music singer of all time and he raped you in a hotel room and you're still working for him and you're not saving this stuff. Now, I do know that there's situations, Diddy's a good example, where people continue to hang out with him even though he was doing horrible things to them. I do know that. But in this situation versus the Diddy situation, for example, there's a lot of evidence against Diddy. These ladies were definitely cognizant enough to save proof of the kind of shit he was doing. Believe me, they got a lot of text, a lot of pictures, and a lot of evidence that has not come out yet in that case. I just can't believe this woman would not have saved that stuff on a hard drive somewhere. Second, she was married. And if you're the makeup artist for Garth Brooks and that happens one time, you're not going to tell your husband about it? Your husband's not going to go try to whip Garth's ass or at least report it? That's very strange to me as well. I'm not saying she's full of shit, but I am saying there's situations where this stuff is legit. And also when you're a very famous anything, actor, actress, music artist, whatever, you open yourself up to people taking advantage of that. I'm not saying that's the situation here. It's alleged. You know, all these things are alleged, but there's a lot of things that, you know, I try to look at things and see if it adds up. And in this situation, there's a lot of things she could have done that she didn't do, and a lot of things she did that she didn't necessarily have to do. Do I think that something was going on with these two? Personally, I mean, I wasn't there. I don't have any direct knowledge, obviously, but it seems like something was going on because they do have the text where she referred to him having a big stick and he responded to it. Was it something that was not consensual? I don't know. Maybe more evidence will come out to the contrary, but definitely a stranger situation than most when it comes to these lawsuits. Now, he did respond to that, and I want to read his response so we can be fair to both sides. And his response is, for the last 2 months, I have been hassled to no end with threats, lies, and tragic tales of what my future would be if I did not write a check for many millions of dollars. It has been like having a loaded gun waved in my face. Hush money, no matter how much or how little, is still hush money, he continued. In my mind, that means I am admitting to behavior I am incapable of. Ugly acts no human should ever do to another. We filed suit against this person nearly a month ago to speak out against extortion and defamation of character. We filed it anonymously for the sake of families on both sides. I want to play music tonight. I want to continue our good deeds going forward. And it breaks my heart that these wonderful things are in question now. I trust the system. I do not fear the truth. I am not the man they have painted me out to be. They referring to her and her attorneys, I suppose. So that was from Garth Brooks. Take what you want from all that. That is the up-to-date information, graphic as it may be. I will keep you updated. I have my own opinion on it. I want to thank everyone for listening, subscribing to us on Patreon. We do a lot with our Patreon. We do bonus episodes. We drop every episode commercial free and early. And if you are one of our higher tier Patreons, you get a quarterly gift. And we sent out a ton of those just a few days ago. So you should be getting those pretty soon. And we have another batch of them coming in because I actually ran out. I didn't expect to have as many Patreon top tier level members as I do at this point. So some of you will be getting those in the next couple of weeks. Some of you will be getting those in the next couple of days. So until next time, for Exposed, Scandalous Files of the Elite, I'm your host, Jim Chapman. Much love.